What happened today, John?
It was a very strong day for the defence. We had John Gertz in the morning, who was in the bunker for Der Spiegel when the cables, when the Iraq war files and the Afghan war files were released. He brought to our attention that the first person to publish was John Young. So the accusations against Julian in that regard are incorrect. He also pointed out that he was one of the people who were in the restaurant, and Julian and he and David Lee, and there was no statement that Julian was callous. Julian was concerned for the people who may be named in the cables, and all the cables, 15,000 cables, were redacted, and Julian implored the State Department, the United States State Department, implored the United States State Department to assist with the redactions, which they ignored. When De Freytag book that David Lee and Luke Harding wrote, Julian actively attempted to warn the State Department and have the De Freytag not to reveal any more information. However, it all came out. So that was, and then this afternoon, a very powerful voice for Julian. He spent the afternoon reviewing Daniel Ellsberg. Don't forget that name. He's 89 years of age. He was fabulous. The execution seems to keep repeating these accusations over and over again that are in the indictment. And Daniel Ellsberg pulled the case of the prosecution to bits, and in each circumstance, for example, the accusations of harm, pointed out that there's nobody who's been harmed. Also pointed out that in testimony at the Chelsea Manning trial, the government itself testified that nobody had been harmed. Also, I can point out that Robert Gates, ex-Secretary of Defence, testified to the Congress that it was embarrassing, awkward, but it did no harm and nobody was harmed. A very powerful defence witness. John Goetz, read column tomorrow. John Goetz, Daniel Ellsberg. Wonderful day for the defence. Thank you.
Thank you, John. She's so proud of you. We love
Sorry,
you.
I was a bit nervous.
No, that you did great. Excellent. Especially because you're having to still keep up this fight. How? Okay. Rebecca, what happened today?
So today there were two witnesses for the defense who were both very strong. This morning we heard from John Goetz from Der Spiegel about his experience working on the redaction and then publication of the documents. A few points of interest from this morning. He was very adamant that WikiLeaks had not published first the unredacted diplomatic cables, but had republished it, that they were first published by other media and other outlets. He also was very adamant on some questioning from the prosecution, which the prosecution seemed to be conflating two different redaction and publication processes, the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs and the diplomatic cables. And Mr. Goetz was very adamant that, to his understanding, with regard to the war logs, that those full data sets had not been published ever unredacted. There was some strange questioning towards the end as well, in which the prosecution, Mr. James Lewis, personality and character of Mr. Assange, which I found a bit unsettling. It was unclear what the purpose of that was, and I think that's something to watch out for in future questioning of witnesses, because that seems to me irrelevant to the extradition proceedings, and that has been an issue in the court of public opinion when it comes to this case. There was also an issue regarding the potential introduction of a witness statement from Khaled Al-Masri that was a procedural question, but essentially the defense and prosecution have been left to come to some sort of agreement about it. The judge has asked for them to do that by tomorrow. The issue at stake is that although the point of this testimony will be to highlight the impact of the publication of cables, the US government worries that accepting this into evidence will acknowledge that the US government is accepting the allegations of torture in this case. So that is a side issue in this particular case, but obviously one with quite big ramifications elsewhere. Then this afternoon we heard from Daniel Ellsberg, and that was a very powerful testimony. He rejected any sort of attempt to paint the Pentagon Papers in quite a different light to WikiLeaks, and really expressed solidarity with Mr. Assange, with WikiLeaks, viewed the motivation in the cases against both himself and now Mr. Assange as very similar, said that they both shared a sort of political opinion in that they were opposed not just to this government administration, but to all administrations in US history, that their work and their motivation was really in the interest of transparency and openness, and that they felt that the problem was governments keeping things secret. He viewed some of the things that were exposed by WikiLeaks in their publications as similar to what he exposed in the Pentagon Papers, and expressed strong solidarity in that regard. He also refuted the allegations that anyone has experienced actual harm as a result of the publications. He said that in his experience in publishing the Pentagon Papers, that he was told at the time, you'll have blood on your hands, and that people were wrong, and he views that as very much similar to what's happening now to Mr. Assange. So that was the substance today. There were fewer technical difficulties than in previous days. Sometimes in the overflow court we're getting a bit of reverberation, sometimes the audio cuts or the video cuts, but today was much easier to follow from a technical perspective than in previous days.
Have you been in correspondence with the courts to get a link back, or organized with Amnesty and the other groups concerning getting virtual access to this proceedings?
So we continue to have access problems as non-governmental organizations. So Reporters Without Borders is collaborating with other NGOs such as Amnesty International that have been affected. But we have, instead of continuing to pursue meaningless correspondence with the court at this point, because they stopped responding at a certain point last week to this, we have focused on finding ways to get into court, which has not been easy. So we have managed to gain access to part of each day's proceedings so far, and that is thanks to support from others, including some really kind grassroots activists who are getting up and queuing from the very early hours to make sure that we're able to get in and comment on what's happening. So I want to make that clear. The access issues have not been resolved. We're only able to get in due to, a combination of tactics to ensure that some of these very few public gallery seats are made available. But on that point, I want to note the court is still holding back 3 spots every session for 3 VIPs who apparently are named. The court knows who they are. We don't know who they are. We're now at the end of day 7. These VIPs have yet to materialize. But yeah, each session, 3 spots out of 5 that are being allocated to members of the public, which includes NGOs, because the court won't distinguish us as different. 5 spots are allocated, so 3 of those are held back each session. In the morning, which tends to start at 10 a.m., usually it's 11:30 by the time they'll allow 3 other members of the public into those seats when the VIPs don't show. In the afternoon, which normally starts at 2, it's usually 2:30 p.m. that then those spaces are made available. So this is time that members of the public who are interested, who are here, some of whom have traveled from other countries, who are queuing from the wee hours, are not able to access the court, and they're being held for no shows. So my question at this point is this, not only who are these VIPs, but if they are VIPs, why can they not be accommodated elsewhere? Why do they have to take up the very few spaces in the public gallery, and particularly when they're not coming? So what that meant this morning for 3 activists who had queued is that they missed the entirety of John Gutz's testimony, and those seats were empty in the public gallery, which is really shameful when this is supposed to be a trial held in public.
What does this say about the Crown Prosecution Service concerning, the importance that this case has and the lack of openness that they seem to have towards and collaboration just towards observers?
The way that many aspects of this have been handled has been extremely frustrating, and is not what I would have expected from what I would have viewed as a very robust legal system. We are a mature democracy. We are a country bound by the rule of law, and we should be getting it better. Some of the technical aspects of this have fallen short of things that we've witnessed in other countries, even developing countries, that seem to have invested a bit more in ensuring that judicial proceedings go smoother, even if we're talking about show trials in countries like Turkey. Okay, and it's not just this this few weeks here in September. This has been the case before in other aspects of Julian Assange's case. With administrative hearings over the past 6 months, there has been a series of problems. In February at Woolwich Crown Court, although we did not have the COVID factor at play yet then, there were a number of issues with access with several aspects of the trial then too. So I've said it this way, and I'll say it this way again. I think many of these things at face value, in and of themselves, could be individually explained away, but the cumulative impact is that it is extremely difficult for anybody wishing to follow this case. And at this point, I have to question, is that just a matter of competence, or is that intentional? Because it feels like to me, as somebody who did queue every morning in February to get into Woolwich Crown Court, and somebody who's been doing her best to get in, to as much as I can of this week's and last week's proceedings, it feels to me like it is intentionally being made as difficult as possible. That we are being made to feel uncomfortable, unwelcome, that aspects of us being able to do our jobs as professional NGO observers are being impacted, and every day there's moving goalposts. So to me, at this point, I will say it definitely feels deliberate. I don't know at whose bidding, but I hope that that those with the power to improve things will do so, because the world is watching, and even if the world cannot be in this courtroom, that's what we are doing there, and we will speak loudly and repeatedly until this is acknowledged by our governments.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What happened this afternoon?
Well, we heard from Daniel Ellsberg, who is of course known for his involvement in leaking the Pentagon Papers. Well, he leaked the Pentagon Papers back in the early 70s, It was really refreshing and to hear his account of what he went through back in those days, and the similarities he saw with what Julian Assange did and WikiLeaks in 2010. In essence, he basically stated there is no difference, apart from the fact that there were no computers back in those days when he was leaking the papers, between what he was doing then and what Julian did. The public interest angle was absolutely clear, and he saw extremely strong similarities there. And remember as well that the case against Daniel Ellsberg did collapse because of an attempt by the government to get smear on him. They burglarized the office of his psychiatrist to get material that they could use against him, and that led to the collapse of the case against Daniel Ellsberg. And he pointed out similar things have happened to Julian Assange. Of course, that we have now reports that there have been spying and recordings of privileged discussion that he has had with his lawyers, as we now know in the ongoing case in Spain. So the similarities are very strong. And he objected against the notion that some are trying to say there is no similarity there. Pentagon Papers are not WikiLeaks. Ellsberg and Julian Assange is not Ellsberg. He said it is wrong, and I object to that. The similarities are very strong. There are the same principles at stake and the same public interests that have to be considered in these two cases. The prosecution was trying to have Daniel Ellsberg admit to the danger that people were put in because of the WikiLeaks publications, and in my opinion was trying to derail him by citing affidavits from the Justice Department to the effect that where they list up possible scenarios where they claim people were put at risk. But Ellsberg was quick to point out that there was actually no allegation that anybody had been harmed. And even now, 10 years on, after the publication of this material, there is not a single evidence of any harm. And he pointed out as well, this is something that came out in the Chelsea Manning trial in 2013, where Pentagon officials who had to testify under oath that they didn't have any such evidence. So this is a propaganda issue which is constantly being brought up. It's unacceptable when there is no proof. And actually, when you read carefully the affidavits from, for example, Gordon Kronberg from the DOJ, they actually say that they have no concrete evidence of any harm, if you read it carefully. So that is what we heard from Daniel Ellsberg, one of many witnesses that we heard already with very, very strong support for Julian Assange and what the plight that he is fighting here against extradition.
Thank you.